3, know where you are going, and part 4, constructive criticism. Okay, save and continue. Course. As we discussed, the theories that inform a teacher's planning, implementation, and assessment, keep in mind we are giving an overview rather than a comprehensive study. Here are some of the most well-known theories of education. Okay, so 7.1.1, Bloom's taxonomy. All right, 1 of 2. Okay, who is Benjamin Bloom? He studied learning and came to the conclusion that learning activities could be categorized into 6 segments based on the level of thinking that they require. He framed his theory into the shape of a triangle with the lowest level thinking at the bottom. He did this because even though the lower level activities require less thinking, they provide the base for higher level thinking. He believed, as many do, it is hard to extend your learning on a topic if you do not understand the topic itself. We will discuss each category in reverse order, starting with what Bloom labeled as the lowest level of thinking. Number 1, remember. Okay, at the base of this triangle, representing the lowest level of thinking is any activity that requires a student to recall facts and basic concepts. These types of activities are extremely important in a student's learning, since it is hard to take the next step without first knowing the basic facts. Activities that require students to remember include defining words, memorizing facts, listing things, and repeating information. Number 2, understand. At the next level of thinking, teachers ask students to comprehend why they are memorizing and repeating. In order for students to explore content in any way, they need to comprehend what they are studying. Activities that require students to explain ideas or concepts include classifying information, describe, discuss, and explain information. Save and continue. Now here's the Bloom's taxonomy 2 of 2. Number 3, apply. Okay, once students understand the information they are learning, they can take the next step and apply what they learned to the new situations. Okay, this displays a higher level of thinking because the student needs to understand the concept enough to apply it to something different. For example, a student may recite Romeo and Juliet, which displays memory. They may comprehend the play enough to explain it, which displays understanding. Now, if they can take that comprehension of the play and use it to understand Othello, they are applying their knowledge. Activities that require students to apply their knowledge include implementing plans, solving problems, and demonstrating knowledge. Next is analyze. True analysis of a concept requires a student to have accomplished all the levels of thinking that come before it. In order to delve into a topic and analyze more than what is explicitly stated, a student needs to understand it completely. When students analyze, they draw connections between ideas and explore connotative and deep meaning. Activities that require students to analyze include differentiating information, organizing information, comparing and contrasting, and experimenting. Okay, next, number 5 is evaluate. The act of evaluating does not necessarily require much thinking. Nabubulol ako sa R. We are constantly in judgment of things we know nothing about. Okay. However, to make an accurate judgment about something, you need to completely understand it, right? So ask your students if Americans were justified in fighting against the British in the American Revolution. they will need to understand how the war began, why each side fought, then make a determination about the colony's justification. Activities that require students to justify a stand or decision include appraisals, arguments, judgments, and critics. Lastly, number 6, create. The highest level of thinking, according to Bloom, is when you ask your students to synthesize what they have learned and create something new. The idea behind the emphasis on this skill is that students need to understand something completely to now go and create something of their own that is related. Activities that require students to synthesize their knowledge include designing, assembling, constructing, writing, something original, etc. Save and continue. Next point is behaviorism. Okay, so here's the one of two. Behaviorist theory is an idea that hinges completely on motivation and how teachers can get students to succeed in the classroom. While many thinkers contributed to the formation of behaviorism, the ideas can be summed up by the famous experiment conducted by Ivan Pavlov, who proved that a dog could be conditioned to respond to a specific stimulus that does not inherently cause that response. He did this by essentially ringing a bell every time he gave a dog food, to the point where the dog began to salivate in anticipation of food when hearing the bell. After some conditioning with this model, he removed the original stimulus and found that the dog continued to salivate at the sound of the bell, even when it was not followed by food. The dog had now been conditioned to feel hungry whenever he heard the bell, according to Pavlov. In order to understand educational theory, we first need to clear up a few phrases that are misunderstood more often than not. Since behaviorism depends heavily on response to a stimulus, the following phrases refer to the manipulation of stimuli by an outsider, in our case, the teacher. Okay, first, positive reinforcement. Okay. So an example of this is giving a student a good grade for working hard on assignment. Negative reinforcement. This is probably the most misunderstood term in behaviorism. Why is this misunderstood? Because the word negative refers to removal and the word reinforcement refers to stimulus. Therefore, negative reinforcement is when an outsider rewards a desired behavior by removing an undesirable stimulus. An example of this would be rewarding a student for good behavior by not yelling at him or her like you normally would. Okay, positive punishment. This is when an outsider presents the subject with an undesirable stimulus as a consequence of doing something wrong or not doing something right. An example of this would be giving a student an F for not doing his or her work. Negative punishment. This is when an outsider removes a desired stimulus from the subject as a consequence of doing something wrong or not doing something right. An example of this would be telling a student he or she can no longer sit with friends because he or she is misbehaving. Okay. Pavlov's experiment displayed classic conditioning, which refers to conditioning involuntary behavior. For example, a dog does not choose to salivate. Okay, and then B.F. Skinner extended this idea, referring to his ideas as operant conditioning, which refers to conditioning voluntary actions through reinforcement and punishment. Save and continue. Now here's the part 2 of behaviorism, of this theory. So according to this theory, learners are not active in the learning process, but rather passive participants who are simply responding to stimuli. Learners begin as a blank page, and behavior is only shaped when stimuli provide either positive or negative reinforcement. The more a behavior is reinforced, whether negatively or positively, the more likely the student is to repeat that behavior. Makes sense. In the same way, the more behavior or the more a behavior is punished, whether negatively or positively, the less likely the student is to repeat that behavior. All right. In operant conditioning, B.F. Skinner tested the efficacy of different methods of disbursements for reinforcements and punishments. In other words, how often do you need to reinforce or punish behavior in order to have it the most lasting effect on the subject? Okay, there's a sub bullet here, which is about continuous reinforcement. This is when a subject is reinforced every time he or she performs the desired behavior. Skinner found that this did not motivate subjects. They did not work as hard, and when the reinforcement was removed, they quickly stopped performing the desired behavior. Okay, let's scroll down. Next is fixed ratio reinforcement. This is when the subject is reinforced after a specific amount of time he or she performs the desired behavior. Skinner found that subjects worked harder with this method and were less likely to stop the desired behavior after the reinforcement was removed. However, this was not the most effective method. Next is fixed interval reinforcement. Okay, this is when a subject is reinforced after a designated amount of time, provided the desired behavior has been performed at least once during that time. Skinner found the subjects worked moderately hard and were about as likely to stop the behavior as the previous model after the reinforcement was removed. Next, variable ratio reinforcement. This is when the subject is reinforced after a random amount of times performing the desired behavior. So he found that this method made subjects work hard and took a long time to stop the behavior after the reinforcement was removed. Next, variable interval reinforcement. Okay, so this is when the subject is reinforced after a random amount of time elapsed, providing the subject performed the desired behavior at least once in that time. He found that this worked equally as well as the previous model, with subjects working hard and taking a long time to stop the desired behavior after the reinforcement was stopped. Okay, so let us save and continue. Next theory is about constructivism. Okay, it hinges on the idea that educators need to meet students wherever they are in terms of skills and knowledge. All right, and help them build on prior knowledge. It is also a theory that seeks to help students find their own ways as they experience learning and come to their own conclusions. According to this theory, the teacher takes a back seat and monitors students as they take control of their learning. A traditional classroom is teacher-centered, but a constructivist classroom is student-centered. Students have an active involvement in the lesson. Instead of passively accepting the work given by the teacher and completing it to receive a grade, the student drives the lesson and works toward a goal with the teacher's guidance. Dito pumapasok yung mga reporting, right? Yung students yung nagre-report or nagre-report sa harap. Tapos nasa likuran lang yung teacher. The class feels less like this Excuse me, nabubulol ako ngayon. The class feels less like dictatorship, which is run solely by one person, and more like an environment run by the entire class. Okay, teachers allow the students to find their own answers rather than telling the students what answers to look for. Students explore things in their own ways and come to their own conclusions instead of exploring things the way the teacher tells them to and coming to the conclusions the teacher wants them to come to. Last point here is teacher encourage students to be autonomous, which means they encourage students to be independent and motivated by their own goals and interests. So many modern classrooms are moving toward this model, or at least toward a model that is similar, following the next theory we will discuss, Constructivism, right? Okay, save and continue. Okay, next is student-centered learning. Okay, so while constructivism is student-centered, there is also a movement in modern education for a broader embrace of student learning or student-centered learning. Okay, even if it's not technically considered constructivist. Since the ideas of student-centered learning have already been covered in constructivism, and by the clarity of the title, we will focus this section on how theorists believe student-centered learning benefits the students. So here are five, alright, dito sa 5 bullets, makikita nyo kung ano-ano iyon, alright? So let's go through each bullets. It says here that students' potential for learning relies heavily on what he or she already knows. That is what the research shows. Okay. Next, one of the most important parts of learning is reflection. All right. In this bullet, it shows that the student is able to see, all right, and they have more opportunity for this type of reflection because they can see and they can look back what they have learned or whether they have already learned it and where he or she needs to go from here. Okay, next, students who are involved in student-centered learning have reportedly been more motivated and satisfied by the school experience. Okay, mas gusto ng mga student na independent sila, kumbaga, right? Okay, next, it allows students with developmental, cognitive, or other differences to all progress. Okay, a student or a teacher leading the class is more likely to need all of his or her students to reach a specific spot at the end of the lesson. However, if the students are working independently, they can set their own goals. Okay, and lastly, one of the biggest obstacles teachers face is the students who is not engaged. Studies have shown that asking students to move around, control their learning, and take responsibility for their development lead to more motivation and progress from the students than in traditional classrooms. Save and continue. Next part is modeling. One of the best ways to help students understand new knowledge or get a grasp of difficult skills is through modeling and scaffolding, which involve the teacher showing students how things are done. Too often in education, teachers make the assumption that students already know exactly what they need to do. More often than not, this is not true. Students will benefit from watching the teacher model a skill or activity. Students are incredibly influential and will look to the teacher for examples on how to act, what to do, and how to succeed. Here are some different ways you can model for your students. First, model desired personal characteristics. Okay, you need to present yourself as a role model. for optimal behavior during a lesson. Alright, tayong mga teacher, tayo talaga yung role model ni student sa school, right? So if we are asking our students to be responsible, creative, diligent, thoughtful, and respectful, alright, we need to show it first. Okay. Students are more likely to meet these expectations if they see you meeting them as well. Okay, right? It's like action speaks louder than words, right? Okay, next, model a task. Let's say you want to teach active reading and annotation strategies to your students. You can do one of two things. You could tell the students exactly what they should do and let them do it, or you could show them what they should do and help them work on it. Select a piece of reading and read it with the class, annotating it in the same way you expect your students to annotate. This way, there will be no confusion about what you are expecting from them. Okay, next, model metacognitive thinking. When you are trying to help your students become better thinkers and arrive at conclusions more effectively and efficiently, it can help to show them how your thought process works. In math class, for example, this works perfectly because you can walk your students through the process of solving a problem. In language classes, you could walk your students through how you would break down a word for proper pronunciation and potential meaning. Diyan din pumapasok yung decoding, right? Okay, next, let the students do the modeling. Assess your students' strengths and weaknesses, and give them opportunities throughout the year or course to model their strengths to the class. Not only will you be reinforcing their success and solidifying their mastery of the skill, but you will be letting students learn from other students. Alright, in whatever way you choose to use modeling, you will make a huge impact on how well your students understand the skill or knowledge you are working on. Sometimes students need to see how it is done, not just hear how it should be done in order to find success. Save and continue. The third part is know where you are going. Instruction planning is not an aimless adventure where teachers decide what they are doing as they go. It takes a lot of forethought. In order to be effective as an educator, you have to understand what you are leading to on day one and categorically take steps to prepare your students to reach that goal. In order to be an effective teacher, you have to know where you are going. And if you want to have an impact on your students, you also let them know where you are going. Okay, first part or subpart is planning for assessment. There is one of two. So backwards planning is an educational strategy that helps teachers make sure everything they do leads to their assessments. It is a pretty simple idea, though it is fairly difficult to execute perfectly. Here are the steps you need to take if you would like to implement backwards planning. First, figure out exactly what you are trying to do with the unit you are planning. At the end of the unit, what are you hoping your students will be able to do? These are your unit objectives and should be created with care because everything you do during the unit will have worked toward these objectives. When you are creating these objectives, focus on what the students will be able to do and by the end of the unit rather than what content you want to cover. All right? Your ultimate goal is to lead your students to the success, not get to a specific point in your curriculum. Okay, pumapasok din dito yung vision, mission, right? Okay, but to sum it up, it's about our objectives. Okay, next, design an assessment in line with the objectives you created. If your objectives are an expression of what your students should be able to do by the end of your unit, then your assessment needs to assess whether your students are able to do these things. Think of it this way. If you bring your car to a mechanic and they tell you they will fix your car, you will assess their success by whether your car is fixed when they are done with it. If you say your students will be able to do A, B, and C by the end of your unit, you need to assess whether they can do A, B, and C at the end of the unit. All right. Third, now that you have created objectives and designed an assessment, you need to figure out what your students will need to achieve your objectives. What skills do they need to improve on? What knowledge do they need? What do they need to practice? What steps do they need to take to get to the point where they can be successful on the assessment and therefore fulfill your objectives? Save and continue. Next is planning for assessment. Okay, two of two. Okay, so number 4, it is about design a unit worth of lesson plans to target the specific skills, knowledge, and areas you have identified as necessary for your students to find success. Later on, we will also discuss about lesson planning, right? So the whole planning process is recursive. Number 5, after you have taken your students through the unit and graded the assessments, it is time to reflect on your teaching. Okay, magkakaroon ka rin ng sarili mong reflection. Alright, were you successful? Did enough students succeed that you can move forward without worrying about their progress? If students did not succeed, what kept them from succeeding? How can you do things differently the next time you implement the unit to ensure that your students are more successful? All right, those are the questions that we need to ask ourselves. Okay, number 6, there are 2 ways in which the previous reflection can inform your teaching. First, redesign your unit so it more effectively helps students achieve your objectives. All right, let's save and continue. The last part and the last page is about constructive criticism. The process we discussed in the previous section does not fall only on your shoulders as a teacher. Great teachers make the students a part of the process, asking them to reflect on their own learning and identify what kept them from finding success. And in order to do that, they need to receive honest and specific feedback from you on their performance. So telling a student good job isn't going to help them improve at all. Honesty is important, and as what we've learned in the previous module, the student will appreciate it, all right, if you are honest to them. But it is also important that you are sensitive to the fact that excessive criticism could simply demotivate your students. All right, so when we are being honest to our student, do it in a nicer way, right? Okay, not really directly criticizing them. Okay, here are some tips for providing your students with constructive criticism. First of all, you need to make sure your expectations are very clear to your students. If they properly understand what is expected of them, you can get a true picture of what they are able to accomplish, and they don't feel blindsided by your feedback. If you have the opportunity, you may want to provide your students with examples to show them what a successful assessment looks like as opposed to an unsuccessful assessment. Next, when you are providing feedback, be specific. Vague, general feedback is worthless. you're already going to have to overcome the obstacle of students not paying attention to your feedback. If you provide meaningless feedback, they are even less likely to focus on it. This is important when you are giving feedback on what they did well as much as it is when you are providing feedback on their weaknesses. All right, so they need both their strengths and weaknesses so they know where to work for or on. Okay. Next is try to balance your positive and negative feedback. Never only provide negative feedback. There is always something good you can say. While a student will be upset getting negative feedback, it will definitely help that you have provided a silver lining so they see their work was not worthless. Next is refer back to your instruction. If students are struggling with something you have not taught in the unit, then it is something you will have to discuss with them. If it is something you have gone over, then you will probably have to go over it again. When the students are struggling with something you haven't taught, it may not be fair to punish them for it. So instead, provide encouraging feedback that identifies the weakness and promises you'll discuss it as a class. All right. And lastly, require your students to do some sort of reflection activity that forces them to read or review the feedback you have provided. If they do not receive the feedback, what is it accomplishing? Right? Okay, so we are finally done with module 7. And now we are going to proceed with the exams. Are you ready? Let's proceed with the answer or with the exam. Okay, so question number 1, according to Bloom's taxonomy, what skills or what skill requires the highest level of thinking? All right, the answer is letter D, which is creating. Check result or save and continue. Question number 2, according to behaviorists, what is it called when you give a student an F for not doing his or her work? Okay, so it is actually a positive punishment. Okay, so the answer is C. Save and continue. Question number 3, which of the following, according to B.F. Skinner, is a method for dispersing reinforcements to your students? Okay, so there are two answers here. Letter A, variable ratio, and letter B, fixed ratio. Save and continue. Number 4, when you are planning backwards, what is the first thing you need to identify? Okay, we need to identify first the objectives. Okay, so it's letter A, save and continue. Number 5, confirm if the following statements are true or false. Letter A, as a teacher, you should model desirable behavior for your students. That is true. Okay, we are the role model. And letter B, lecturing is a great example of student-centered learning. Okay, of course, that is false. All right, we need to have the student involved or the student centered, not just involved. Okay, so the answer is false. Save and continue. Number 6, which of the following are good tips for providing your students with constructive criticism? Okay, there are 3 answers. Letter A, be honest. Letter C, be specific. And letter D, balance strengths and weaknesses. Okay, we already know all about this, right? We know that the students will appreciate the more that we are honest with them. Okay, and also we have to be specific. Saying good job is not enough. Actually, it doesn't motivate our students. So, all right, we have to be really honest, specific, and of course, we have to balance strengths and weaknesses. All right, kagaya nung sinabi kanina about dun sa silver lining, right? Although, kunyari, puro weakness lang talaga yung makita natin, puro weaknesses lang, we still have to find, all right, a strength out of those weaknesses ng student para ma-motivate natin siya. Save and continue. And we're done with Module 7. Let us proceed with Module 8. Next is Module 8, Lesson Planning. As a teacher, lesson planning is extremely important because it helps you understand where you are going and makes it easy to show the administration you are following the curriculum. Remember earlier na-touch na natin ng bahagya itong lesson planning when we write our objectives and we make sure that pati yung mga strategies natin na nagpa-follow dun sa objectives natin. So, pasok yung lesson planning doon. Alright, for the latter reason, lesson plans have become more formal in the recent years. And it is now more important that even to understand what goes into a lesson plan, as well as how your lesson plans further your objectives. To further this end, this module will review all the components of a strong lesson plan, as well as how you can prepare your lessons in a way that will be most effective and beneficial to your students. Okay, so there are 5 parts in this module. Number 1 is standards and objectives. Number 2, following a curriculum. Number 3, varying instruction. Number 4, teaching strategies. And number 5, meaningful assessments. Let's proceed dun sa first part, standards and objectives. So every time you create a lesson plan, you need to create an objective and make sure it is aligned with a standard. We will first take time to discuss standards since they should be the basis for all your lesson plans. Alright, so 8.1.1 is standards. What is standard? Alright, standards are a set of skills students need to have by the time they leave your classroom. Okay, so what are standards? Okay, kasi maraming standards. So, these standards are not set by the teacher, but rather accessed by the teacher for use in their lesson plans. Depending on where you are teaching or where you are teaching, the skills the standards require are going to be different. For the sake of this module, we will focus on the general idea of standards and how they inform instruction. Let's first look at the general skills that standards usually focus on. Okay, so here are the general skills. There are 5. First is reading literature. Next is reading for information, writing, speaking and listening, and also language. Like what, this is really very important for us as a TESOL teacher. Okay, save and continue. Alright, so next are objectives. Alright, so once you have a clear understanding of the standards you need to hit within a unit, it is time to think about the learning objectives you are going to create. Whereas standards tell you what your students need to achieve by the end of a unit or the end of the school year, lesson objectives detail where you want your students to be at the end of a lesson. It is your job as a teacher to make sure the lesson objectives you have throughout a unit work toward helping your students master the skills outlined in the standards. Here are some tips for writing effective lesson objectives. First, the first question you need to ask yourself is, what do I want my students to be able to do by the end of the lesson? These objectives should be focused on skills rather than content and cover the skills the students are going to develop through the unit. So there will be some kind of reflection dito, no? When you ask yourself a question. As a teacher, we always need to do that. Alright, next, once you have written lesson plans for your entire unit, you should review your learning objectives to make sure they all build toward meeting the standards for the unit. Okay, and lastly, Lesson plans need to be clear and measurable. At the end of a lesson, you should be able to look back on the lesson and identify how many of your students met the objective with accuracy. Okay, so aside from reflection, all right, we also need to do the review. And also, we have to make sure that our lesson plans are clear and measurable. Okay, save and continue. There are three types of objectives. Number one is cognitive objectives. Number two, psychomotor objectives. And lastly, attitudinal objectives. Okay, so isa-isahin natin. Let's review each kind of objectives. The first one, cognitive, all right, it is something like enriching the knowledge of our student, all right, through demonstration, practice, all right, related to the knowledge that they are enriching. And also, in this cognitive objective, students are expected to comprehend, apply, and synthesize their knowledge. So, pang-advanced level na ito. So, what's the difference between the cognitive and the psychomotor objectives? Yung psychomotor objectives, basically it's more for early education, for beginners. And also it says here that education for students who struggle with coordination and dexterity. All right, so the example is given here. Okay, because this kind of objective are less common in mainstream classroom as they apply to dexterity and physical coordination. Okay, lastly is attitudinal objectives. All right, so this is rare as lesson objectives and are more purposeful when used as classroom objectives. Okay, it requires students to behave in a certain way, which is more likely a concern for the classroom all year round rather than a concern for a specific lesson. All right, save and continue. There are rules and guidelines that govern your creation of lesson objectives, and while they vary depending on where you are teaching, we will cover some of the universal ideas. Remember that lesson objectives are the backbone of your entire lesson. Okay, and we should always remember na dapat based din ito dun sa standard kung saan tayo nagtuturo. Kaya parating sinasabi ito, no? They vary depending on where you are teaching. Okay, depende din sa company, depende sa type ng students nyo, alright, sa culture nila or sa lahi kung saan galing si student. First, learning objectives should be focused on observable activities. Okay, in order to identify whether your students have achieved the objective you set out for them, the objective needs to be observable or something you can measure through observation. This idea will help keep your objectives specific and attainable. Okay, as we have learned earlier, it has to be clear and measurable, right? Next, learning objectives should be focused on student activities. Okay, many teachers make the mistake of thinking lesson objectives should focus on what they hope to accomplish during the lesson. Okay, this puts the focus on teaching rather than learning and does not ensure the students understand the material, but instead ensures the teacher is delivering the material. Teaching may occur, but learning may not. Your lesson objectives should always be about what the students are going to accomplish. Okay. Hindi naman kasi parate merong nag-aano sa atin, no? Nagsusupervise. Or, anong tawag doon? Nakalimutan ko na yung term. Merong nag-grade sa atin as a teacher. So, kailangan, obviously, ang focus natin sa objective is and ayun naman talaga yung pinaka-goal natin, no, na may matutunan si student. Alright, merong sub-point dito sa second, alright. So it says here, learning objectives should be focused on student outcomes. Okay, another mistake a lot of teachers make is creating a learning objective that simply describes what the students are going to do during the lesson. This is not the purpose of an objective and only measures whether or not the students have compelled or complied with the teacher's directions. As a student, I can comply with everything my teacher asks without reaching the true objective of improving a skill or extending knowledge. There should be an outcome tied to each lesson objective. Okay, so what are the good lesson objectives? Number one, students will be able to make a judgment about the strength of a speaker's argument. Next, they will be able to determine which text best portrays the culture of the 1930s. All right, these are the examples. Okay, next, what are the bad example of bad lesson objectives? First, students will be able to write an essay and students will be able to hear about World War II. So obviously, self-explanatory na rin to. Once you are able to make a judgment, then of course, that really means that you really understood the lesson, right? You were able to explain it and make a judgment. Okay, save and continue. Next. Next is following a curriculum. Depending on where you end up teaching, you may have a say in the creation of the curriculum, but it is more likely you will not. Gone are the years when a curriculum was just an amorphous general idea, and here to stay is a culture where schools have an extremely detailed and prescribed curriculum for each of their teachers to follow. To understand how to follow a curriculum, we first need to look closer at the components involved. All right. Under this, 8.2.1 is curricular components. First is standards again, so don't be confused kasi marami standards dito kagaya yung kanina, 'di ba? Puro mga phonemics naman narinig nyo. This time it's all about standards. Okay, as we discussed earlier in this module, all planning should start with the standards you want your students to achieve during the curriculum. Next is essential questions. Whereas the standards are focused on what the students are going to be able to achieve or work on during a unit, the essential question is the thematic question the students should be exploring throughout the unit. For example, you may decide you want your students to work on a standard that focuses on using two informational texts to draw conclusions. You may want to design a unit that covers World War II and ends with a discussion on the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You can have an essential question that asks something like, should there be rules in times of war? Then, your students could explore two nonfiction texts to draw conclusions about America's decision to drop atomic bombs to inform their understanding of the essential question. Save and continue. Next. Next, assessments. As we discussed before, the summative assessment for the unit should assess how well the students fulfill the standards and objectives of the unit. However, a detailed curriculum will also include formative assessments that help your students build skills and scaffold on their way to the summative assessment. Next, model lessons. A thorough curriculum will provide you with exemplar lessons or lesson plans you can either use, modify, or look to for guidance on how you should be framing your lessons. Exemplar texts. Your curriculum will likely detail the texts you can use for each unit. These will be the texts that are vetted to make sure they fit the unit thematically and fit within the appropriate reading level for students in your class. Secondary material. Your curriculum should also offer your secondary sources that fit within your units. In an American English unit plan, there are typically suggestions of arts and music to go along with the literature that needs to be covered. Save and continue. Alright, so second bullet, which is teaching to the curriculum. Although a lot of school systems have adopted standard curriculums that do not budge very much, research shows the best model for a curriculum is a plan that is fluid. In this section, we will discuss the way curriculum should be used and followed in the classroom, even if many schools are not necessarily listening to the research. Yeah. All right. The best way to use curriculum is in a cycle, where the plan is in the hand of the teacher or group of teachers and within the reach of their revisions. The ideal curriculum cycle hinges on three parts. Okay, planning, implementation, and reflection. Although, actually, four parts siya. Meron ding revision. Alright, so what is planning? The curriculum plan is initially created based on what the teachers and administrators generally accept as the needs of the students. Alright, so the implementation, it means that members of the teaching staff design their own lesson plans to work within the structure of a unit in the curriculum plan. Alright, so there will be a group of teachers now, or the staff. Next is reflection. After the implementation of the curriculum, teachers meet with each other to discuss strengths and weaknesses of the plan. The teachers use data they collected from the formative and summative assessments, not just anecdotal evidence to inform their discussions. Alright, so although hindi nila isinali itong revision dun sa hinges or dun sa ideal curriculum, basahin natin kung ano ba itong revision. This is the most important part. Many schools are not giving their teachers freedom to use. Teachers use what they found in their reflection to inform revisions to the curriculum. If there are difficulties the students had or skills they did not retain, the teachers rewrite unit plans and ensure these problems are addressed. Without the revision process, the reflection process is not effective. Next year, the teachers go through the same process and make sure their planning and instruction is constantly improving. Okay. So actually, ang lesson before, naalala ko yung mother ko, no? Nagawa siya talaga ng sarili niyang lesson plan. Meron lang parang guide. Pero ngayon, ano na yata, nakalimutan ko. Nakalimutan ko na naman kung ano yung term. Tagal ko na kasing ginagawa ng ano. Alright. Ano bang tawag dun? Hindi naman portfolio. Anyway, pag naalala nyo, pakitype na lang. Okay, tatry ko rin alalahanin maya-maya. Okay, so save and continue. Nasa dulo ng dila ko. I think it starts with a P. Oh my gosh, I really forgot. Okay, save and continue. The third part is varying instruction. Okay, if there is one thing educational theorists agree on nowadays, it is the best way to reach the most students is by varying and differentiating your instruction. Magiging boring kung walang ganun, ano? We will begin by discussing first one of the basic ideas behind the efficacy of varied instruction, the idea of multiple intelligences. Okay, 8.3.1 Gardner's Multiple Intelligences. A Harvard professor named Howard Gardner penned the theory that there are multiple types of intelligence, each valuable in its own way. If you buy into this theory, which many do, this means the students in your class all have specific strengths and weaknesses you can access through varied instruction. Here are Gardner's multiple intelligences. I really agree na iba-iba talaga yung mga student. Okay, so kailangan adaptable din yung lesson natin sa kanila or yung instruction, yung method natin. First, visual spatial. People who are intelligent in this area are very good at understanding their environment and reasoning spatially. They respond to activities that allow them to problem solve, organize, or create with their hands. Bodily kinesthetic. People who are intelligent in this area are very controlled with their body and are prone to athletic and/or dexterous tasks. They respond to activities that require them to move, act, and learn with their hands. Next, musical. People who are intelligent in this area are usually natural musicians who understand sound and rhythm more than most. They respond to rhythmic activities and anything that involves music or creating sound. Ay, ako to. Charing. Alright, save and continue. Next, interpersonal. People who are intelligent in this area have an easy time connecting with people and love to help others. They respond to anything that involves working in a group, participating in a discussion, or activities that require them to make connections with people around them. Intrapersonal. People who are intelligent in this area are in tune with themselves, are good at setting goals and keeping themselves on track to accomplish them. They respond to independent and self-driven learning because it allows them to take control of their own progress. Next, linguistic. People who are intelligent in this area are very good with words. They understand language and how to use it to their advantage. They respond to activities that require them to read, use words creatively, and/or solve word puzzles. Logical, mathematical. Okay, so iba pala to, iba pa to dun sa number kanina na nabasa natin. People who are intelligent in this area are very good at reasoning and calculating things. They respond to activities that require them to work logically, reason things out, and solve puzzles. Alright, so save and continue tayo. Next is how to differentiate. Okay, so differentiate. Here is where you find a point of contention in the educational community. Differentiation is a buzzword politicians and administrators love to throw around without actually helping teachers understand what it is. Okay, ang liit, di ko na siya mabasa. Teachers often fear differentiation because they are afraid of the amount of work the idea brings with it. Okay, it doesn't have to be scary. However, here are some simple steps you can take to differentiate your instruction and appeal to your students of different abilities and learning types. Okay, tayo mga teacher magaling dito, ano? Sa dami ng students natin, alam natin yung names nila. At first dito, sabi, get to know your students. It's not only their name, right, that we have to know. Alright, so there is no way to vary instruction to your students if you do not find out information about them. There are a few different ways you can research your students' learning styles. The first is to ask them. All right, we need to ask them. This strategy works better with older students and often yields the most honest results. The second way is by giving your students benchmark assessments early in the year. This strategy can give you a lot of information, but it can also be skewed by apathy, distractions, poor testing abilities, etc. The third way is through observations during classroom activities. You may have guessed the best course of action is one of these strategies alone, but rather a combination of all of them. As a teacher, use everything at your disposal to better understand what works best for your students. All right, next, be prepared with the toolkit of teaching strategies. Now that you have a good understanding of each of your students and how they learn best, you need to be able to access your vast repertoire of teaching strategies in order to facilitate your students' needs. These teaching strategies should be very diverse, covering a wide array of teaching styles, including, so here are the teaching styles, right? Direct instruction, cooperative learning, inquiry-based learning, information processing strategies. Okay, so here are the teaching styles na matututunan din natin dito sa module na ito. And tingnan natin isa-isa. For example, itong direct instruction. Okay, traditional. Alright? Kita naman natin, self-explanatory. Next is cooperative learning. Alright? Actually, ito is very trendy teaching style because it allows students to take responsibility for their learning and is conducive to a student-centered learning environment. Which is kung mapapansin nyo, dito sa TESOL, ilang beses, dito sa course na to, ilang beses sinabi yung the effectiveness ng student-centered way of teaching, no? Okay, next, inquiry-based learning. So according to many experts, this is one of the most rigorous form of teaching because it requires students to create their own questions or hypotheses, research, experiment, or explore these questions or hypotheses, then draw conclusions based on their findings. Pang-graduating level na to. Okay, next, information processing strategies. These types of lesson ask students to practice and deepen their core skills in order to become better writers, readers, and thinkers. Students are getting the practice they need in the skills that are most important. Save and continue. Next is identify which strategies will work best for your students. You know what your students need in order to succeed, and you have a toolkit full of teaching strategies. Now it is time to put it together and match teaching strategies with your students' needs. Right, next, vary your instruction. Here is the part where many teachers and administrators slip up. People often think varied or differentiated instruction means you always have your students doing group work and working independently. Sometimes, direct, teacher-centered instruction is also appropriate. Sabi dito, sometimes, no? It means not all the time. Okay, the point of varied and differentiated instruction is balancing different types of instruction throughout your curriculum. When appropriate, use direct instruction, and when appropriate, use cooperative learning. The point is to use all types of instruction to appeal to every kind of student and to make the most impact you can. Okay, kagaya na sinabi ko kanina, simpleng-simple. Pag pareho lang yung style natin, alright, puro teacher lang nagsasalita, maboboard si student. Pagka puro si student naman ang pinapagawa natin, right, puro reporting, magkakaroon din ng bad outlook si student dun sa teacher. Or may baka isipin ni student, ay, tamad naman ni teacher, puro pa report lang. And okay lang sana kung gano'n, no? Kung student-centered. As long as si teacher is nagsusupervise talaga and nagbibigay ng sarili niyang insights. Right? Talagang ginaguide si student. Okay, next, assess and adjust. As we discussed in following a curriculum, you need to assess your students, reflect on your teaching, then adjust your teaching strategies to better serve your students. Teaching is a growing experience, and you need to constantly question and adjust strategies to become more effective. Save and continue. Teaching strategies. Okay, ito na yung next part nitong module. Going through all the existing teaching strategies would take an entire course. So we are going to focus on few effective strategies that appeal to students with different learning styles. Okay, so yung few lang, hindi natin lalahatin, ano? Alright, and here are a few. Okay, number one, Jigsaw. Jigsaw is a great cooperative learning strategy because it gives students the opportunity to take control of their learning and is a natural scaffold. In a jigsaw, you group your students to interact with new knowledge and give them a short time to focus on a specific topic. Each group has a different topic, so at the end of this short period of time, you rearrange the groups and students become experts on their original topic. For example, you can split your class of 25 into 5 groups of 5 and have each group research a different European country. Then you go to each group and give each member a number from 1 to 5 and have the students rearrange based on those numbers. Now you have 5 groups, each containing one student who has researched each European country. Now the students teach each other. Number 2, think, pair, share. Okay, so this is a very versatile strategy because it can be used for a 5-minute initiation or for a class-long activity. Put simply, you give your students something to think about, then ask them to get into pairs, then ask them to share what they come up with. This can be done as formally or informally as you would like, and it works with the different types of content. Number 3, fishbowl. This is a modified Socratic seminar that asks students to participate in a discussion and evaluate each other's performance during the discussion. Essentially, students are structured into 2 circles, one inside the other. Inside the circle, students are given a topic, question, or idea to discuss. In the outer circle, students are paying attention to the inner circle and evaluating the strength of their discussion. The most effective fishbowls ask the students in the outer circle to focus on specific parts of the discussion. Teachers can either ask each outer student to focus on one inner student or ask each outer student to focus on one skill, idea, or form of discussion. All right, and lastly, testing a hypothesis. Okay, as we mentioned in the previous section, asking students to pose hypotheses, test their hypothesis, then draw conclusion is accessing very high levels of thinking. Pang-graduating na to, no? Yung mga nagawa ng thesis. Okay, anyway, alam natin na itong different learning styles na to, ito talaga yung most effective out of all different learning styles. Okay. Save and continue. Alright, last part of Module 8, Lesson Planning. It's 8.5, Meaningful Assessments. We discussed assessments in the previous module, so we will not discuss them ad nauseam here. Okay, so that means that we are not going to be redundant, because it's going to be so annoying if we keep on talking about that. All right, so to ensure your assessments are authentic and meaningful, we make sure that they align with the standards you are trying to meet and the objectives you have set for your students to help them reach those standards. To make an assessment truly meaningful, it needs to be reflective of something students might see in a career they end up, and should also give students multiple ways to display their knowledge. Alright, so here are the example of different types of assessments you can create. First is writing, performance, arts, and teaching. Alright, so our writing assessments do not have to be traditional essays, right? Ang dami. You can just have your students create storybooks, poems, journal, etc. etc. Next is performance. Having your students create a presentation, a performance, or something that requires them to stand up in front of the class and create something informative and entertaining is a great way to find out how much your students know. These types of activities are creative, entertaining, and allow students to have fun with their learning. Next, art. Students can display their understanding of a concept by creating something artistic. Whether you ask your students to create an illustration, draw or build a diagram, or create a visual project, you should allow your students to access their creativity in order to display their understanding of the material. Next is teaching. Asking your students to teach material to a class is a great way to judge whether they know it or not. As you know, or will soon find out, you cannot effectively teach something unless you understand it inside out. Okay, so una-una, dapat alam natin yung itinuturo natin, right? That's why napaka-importante na, okay, i-relate ko lang yung sa certificate. Kasi marami dyan nagbebenta ng certificate, right? Yeah, sinasabi nila PM me for assistance. But actually, they will just sell you the certificate. Hindi ito yung kagaya ng nabibili lang sa recto, right? Kailangan alam natin mismo kung ano yung content nito. Although, binasa lang natin, no, at may konting explanation lang. But it still helps, no? At least hindi lang basta sagot ang nakuha natin or hindi lang basta ready-made na certificate lang yung nakuha nyo. Kundi, alam nyo rin kung ano yung content nitong course na ito. Alright? Okay, save and continue, and we are going to proceed with our exam. Alright, question number 1. Sa Module 8 Lesson Planning, which of the following is not an important trait of effective lesson objectives? Okay, so the answer here is letter D. The objective relates to the standards. Alright, ang question dito is not, right? It means the first 3 are definitely important traits of effective lesson objectives. Alright, the objective is measurable, it's written in first person, and focuses on students' actions. Alright, so the question here, kaya minsan tricky din yung question, ano? Kaya dapat talaga binabasa natin. Sabi dito, not. Alright, so the answer is D, relates to the standards. Save and continue. Right, question number 2. Which of the following are typical categories for education standard to cover? Alright, there are 3 answers here. Reading for information, C, writing, and letter D, reading literature. Okay, save and continue. Number 3, what are cognitive objectives? Okay, letter D. Objectives that measure a student's exploration of knowledge. That's the correct answer. Save and continue. Question number 4. Which of the following are common components of a curriculum? Letter A, assessments, C, standards, and D, exemplar texts. Save and continue. Number 5. Which of the following steps comes first in the curriculum process? Ang hirap basahin curriculum. Okay. Letter B, planning. Okay, comes first, no, in the curriculum process, planning. Save and continue. Number 6, confirm if the following statements are true or false. Letter A, for a curriculum to be effective, teachers need to be able to revise it. True. Okay. And letter B, Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences refer to his ranking of which types of intelligences are more important. False. Okay, naalala nyo yung varied techniques. Kailangan, ano? Okay, save and continue. What is the purpose of varied instruction? Okay, letter A, to appeal to the different strengths of your students, and letter B, to appeal to different types of intelligence. Alright. Bakit nga pala 92? Okay, yung sagot ko, may mali yata ako dito. Kaya, ito na lang yung score ko. Pero lahat na nung nandito ngayon, yung mga nakikita nyo, ayan na yung mga tamang sagot, right? So, I assume, pag chinek nyo yung result, is still 100% pa rin kayo. Right? Okay. Anyway, kagaya nga ng sinabi ko, it's up to you kung gusto nyo talagang 100% yung maging score nyo, no? Although, alam nyo naman na dito sa course na, or sa tutorial na ginagawa natin, puro mga tamang sagot na yung makukuha nyo, right? Bakit naman natin mamaliin? Or bakit ko naman ibibigay yung maling sagot? Tutorial nga ito. Alright. So, thank you for being with me on our 4th day of tutorial. Alright. Anyway, pwede nyo namang ma-replay ito. Right? So, don't forget to share this video para sa mga wala pang TESOL. Okay? And make sure that you share this for free. Okay? Kung free nyo na nakuha yung tutorial or yung information, free nyo rin siyang i-share. Alright? Okay. Huwag tayong maging mapang-abuso. Thank you. See you tomorrow.